There's two things I know about, it's wrestling and humiliation. Years before I got into the business, I was humiliated on a regular basis, and now that I'm involved in wrestling, I'm still humiliated pretty much every day. Only this time, I get paid for it! If you're going to be a wrestler, and especially if you have aspirations of working for a company like WWE and a man like Vince McMahon, you better get comfortable with the idea that at some point you will be humiliated. Not just humiliated, but humiliated in front of the world. Whether it's as the butt of an on-air joke, a participant in a mortifying angle, or as the loser of a match with a demeaning stipulation. You work for the world's richest 8-year-old, to whom nothing is funnier than seeing one of his employees degraded and embarrassed by having to do something that makes them feel awkward. Though, to be fair, he'll then usually go ahead and do the same thing himself. Not that we as wrestling fans are any better, of course. We're the ones that tune in hoping to see someone get shaved bald, or be forced to kiss something unholy, or thrown into something disgusting. Because, let's admit it, it can be pretty bloody funny. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are the 10 most humiliating wrestling match stipulations. Join us. Number 10, the Crybaby Match. We kick things off with one for the adult baby crowd, with the one and only Crybaby Match from 1996. The stipulation was called for after the newly heel 1-2-3 kid who had turned on partner Razor Ramon began acting like, well, a big baby. The objective of the match was to beat your opponents and then, once they were incapacitated, put them in a giant nappy, give them a bottle to suck on, and douse them with baby powder. So far, so well attuned to Vince McMahon's sense of humor, eh? The match was a decent one, but the stipulation naturally overshadowed the action in the ring. In the end, it was the bad guy who got the better of the kid, dropping him with 2 razor's edges before following through with the punishment. Amazing to think that having been booked in such a belittling bout that both Scott Hall and Sean Waltman would leave for the guaranteed money of WCW shortly after, eh? Anyway, the Crybaby match was certainly humiliating, but also didn't really strike a chord with the audience and hasn't been seen since. If anyone from WWE Creative is watching, I would suggest reviving it and booking, I don't know, let's say Chad Gable versus Cesaro, because at this point, how can things get any worse? Number 9, paddle on a pole. The old on a pole match. A Vince Russo favorite, the pole match has given some revered classics over the years. Who could forget the leather jacket, pinata, and Viagra on a pole matches that went down in WCW? Some of my favorite matches ever, and I'm sure some of yours too. One of the most consistent items attached to a pole for the purposes of a wrestling match stipulation is the paddle. A speciality of early 2000s WWE, when they were desperately trying to be edgy and recapture the success of the Attitude Era, the objective of the paddle on a pole match was to retrieve said paddle in order to smack your opponent's backside with. Obviously, this wasn't a match you would find a Triple H or a Brock Lesnar in, although there's your terrifying thought for today. No, this was custom designed for WWE's divas. Obviously, getting your hide tanned with a big bit of wood on global television is humiliating enough, but add in the fact that these matches often require the likes of Trish Stratus, Tori Wilson, and Terry Runnels to, compete in barely their bikinis, and the sordidness gets ramped up a fair few notches. For the curious, my favourite paddle on a pole match was that one with Stacy Keibler and Trish, but I only watched it for the articles. Number 8, the Tuxedo Match. Of course, WWE are equal opportunity offenders, and while the women were placed into the majority of their clothes-ripping contests, the company did save a few for the men too. In truth, the Tuxedo Match has been around for decades, and was a particular favourite in promotions based in the American South. The masculine equivalent of the bra and panties or evening gown matches, the match involves the participants trying to strip each other of their tuxedos. Obviously, the Tuxedo Match is so much hotter than anything involving the fairer sex, especially when the likes of Jim Cornette, Paul Heyman, Harvey Whippleman, Howard Finkel, Tony Chimmel, or Hornswoggle are involved. Yes, this is a stipulation played for laughs and often involves non-wrestlers. WWE seemed to take particular delight in placing the Fink in them. As he was a favourite target for Ribs, he found himself in many tuxedo matches over the years, and you could practically hear Vince cackling away from the gorilla position when he invariably lost his slacks. There have been many different variations of the Tuxedo Match too, such as the Tuxedo versus Evening Gown match, and the spectacularly timed titled Loser Leaves Town Tuxedo Street Fight Coal Miner's Glove Steel Cage Match. That's a mouthful. Number 7, the Hog Pen Match. While lots of humiliating stipulation matches could be done by just about anyone, the Hog Pen Match was really created for one man. Henry O. Godwin, Hog, get it? Was one half of the Godwins tag team in the mid-90s. The Godwins were a pair of big, corn-fed Arkansas pig farmers who wrestled in dungarees and John Deere caps and had one particularly humiliating trick that they routinely pulled. They slopped people. That is, they poured a bucket of slop, i.e. disgusting leftovers intended for the pigs to eat, over their enemies. The blue-blooded Greenwich aristocrat, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, was a natural adversary for the less refined Henry, and the two worked extensively together in 1995, often competing in slot matches on house shows. For their big pay-per-view showdown at In Your House Seasons Beatings, WWE booked them in the Hog Pen match, where the winner had to throw the loser into an actual hog pen situated by the entrance. The game won the match, but wasn't spared a humiliation, as he too was thrown into the muck after the fact. WWE brought back the hog pen stipulation for Extreme Rules 2009, with Santina Marella beating Vicky Guerrero and Chavo Guerrero to retain the title of Miss WrestleMania. And everything in that last sentence has made both you and I dumber for having heard it. Number 6, people as property. A title, a trophy, even something like a career or some sort of meaningful personal artifact. All perfectly reasonable things to be put on the line to be won or lost in a wrestling match. Over time, we've seen just about everything wagered in the ring, but one prize is possibly the most inappropriate and humiliating. They are rare, but we've seen a few different matches where a person could become the property of someone else depending on the outcome. And by a person, I of course mean a woman, since in the chauvinistic world of sports entertainment, it was a woman's services that were being offered 99.9% of the time. As far as the most high-profile people as property matches, the first that springs to mind is Brian Pillman and Goldust battle at In Your House Ground Zero in 1997. Per the stips, if the bizarre one prevailed, then Pillman would have to leave the company. If the loose cannon one, on the other hand, he would get the services of Goldust's wife Marlena for 30 days. Pillman won and proceeded to air his and Marlena's Triple X Files on Raw. 6 years later, and Test and Scott Steiner spent most of the year battling over the right to own Stacy Keibler, placing her on the line in 3 separate matches. Just imagine poor Stacy at ringside, knowing that she could end up being owned by a man who calls himself the Big Bad Booty Daddy. Number 5, hair versus hair. Look, in a perfect world, we would all be bald. And we would live on planet Argon, where the life expectancy is 1 million years and everyone is given a pet monkey. But this isn't a perfect world, and in it, some people really value their hair. To some, to go bald is a nightmare delayed with 1,000 comb-overs and a lifetime membership to the hair club for men. Putting the locks on the line makes good sense in the context of wrestling and should, in theory, pique the curiosity of fans who want to see what a particular performer looks like sans curls. It's a common stipulation, and everyone from CM Punk and Kurt Angle to Molly Holly and even Vince McMahon himself have found themselves strapped to the barber's chair. For some, the humiliation is such that after they get the chop, they resort to wearing a wig, mask, or in the CEO's case, a rather tasteful do-rag. While in kayfabe, the haircut is an unwanted humiliation, in reality, it's often the expressed desire of the talent to get a number one all over. Angle, for example, was already naturally going bald, while Kevin Nash was required to get rid of his mane after he was offered a role in the film The Punisher. Number 4, loser wears a dress. Wrestling can be an ultra-masculine industry at the best of times, full of testosterone-filled alpha males who want nothing more to have the biggest muscles, get pushed the hardest, and be paid the most money at the end of it all. To a fair few of them, the thought of going out in front of a crowd or on television in front of millions wearing something like a woman's dress must be absolutely mortifying. I mean, let's not get caught up in the fact that they're already out there showing off their nipples in their tiny little trunks with their name printed on the arse. Because that's not embarrassing at all, is it? No, wearing a lady's garment would be the worst. And so it's no surprise that companies have booked loser wears a dress matches in the past. 2 big ones spring to mind, the first being another entry into the artistically bereft Pillman-Goldust feud from '97. Goldie won that one at SummerSlam, forcing Pillman to come out on Raw in a lovely shiny number ripped straight from Terry Runnels' wardrobe. The second was just just a little while later in WCW when Chris Jericho beat Perry Saturn at Sold Out 1999, though Pez didn't mind losing and actually made it a part of his gimmick for a while. Many years later, Big Vito would start wearing a dress while in WWE, though he didn't lose a match or anything. He just liked the way the breeze felt against his bollocks. Number 3, loser eats dog food. We've all eaten disgusting things before, haven't we? Some of us in the non-judgmental darkness of our bedroom at 2 in the morning, and others on camera for the sake of first-class YouTube wrestling content. There's no real shame in tucking into a deep-fried Mars bar or a nice plate of super noodles with tinned hot dogs, beans and turkey dinosaurs, but dog food? That's where I draw the line. Not on this channel, no, no, no. There are a couple of WWE superstars who also know a thing or two about tasting the rancid stuff, having been booked in loser eats dog food matches in the past. The British Bulldog was, I guess appropriately, booked into such a match with Ken Shamrock at SummerSlam 97, though he walked out of that one with his dignity intact. Baron Corbin, however, wasn't so lucky when he teamed with Dolph Ziggler and Bobby Roode in a losing effort to Roman Reigns and the Usos, and was subsequently tied to the ring post and force-fed some of Rex's favourite dinner. The loser eats dog food was a favourite match type in Memphis in the early 90s, though it was a prize more than a punishment, since Jerry Jarrett and Lawler were paying their wrestlers so little they could barely afford actual food. Number 2, kiss my foot. Speaking of Jerry Lawler, he naturally found issue with Bret Hart being crowned King of the Ring at the 1993 pay-per-view of the same name. He made his displeasure known, attacking the Hitman during his coronation ceremony, and then spent the better part of the next several years taunting him and his parents Stu and Helen, who had become regular targets of the well-worn Jerry Lawler playbook. It was a long and intense rivalry, and it required a big, memorable blow-off, so, tying into the theme of royalty, the two were booked in a Kiss My Foot match at the 95 King of the Ring. The commentator didn't wash his feet in the weeks leading up to it, which he was more than happy to brag about on TV. But it was all for naught, as the excellence of execution won the match and forced not only his own sweaty foot down the King's gullet, but also, somehow, Jerry's own. It was a great payoff, but the match type was rested for some 16 years before being brought back at Over the Limit in 2011. Lawler was involved again, as was Bret, as Michael Cole finally got his comeuppance for months and months of instigation and enjoyed a nice snack of his fellow broadcaster's barbecue sauce-drenched toes. Number 1, kiss my ass. What's worse than being forced to kiss a foot? Well, loads of things actually. What about being forced to kiss someone you really didn't fancy behind the bike sheds in high school? How about being forced to kiss a dead fish? Or being forced to give your Auntie Maureen a big one on the lips? There are loads of horrible things that someone can be made to kiss, but WWE settled on another man's bare backside for their most humiliating stipulation. And who better to be in the first ever one than Mr. Ass himself? The stipulation had been used once before actually, in the infamous Steve Austin vs. Owen Hart match at SummerSlam 1997, but Stone Cold somehow managed to win that one despite the neck injury, and thus didn't have to follow through with the forfeit. 2 years later at SummerSlam 99, Billy Gunn battled The Rock, but instead of offering a peck on his own posterior, brought out an ample-sized woman for the people's lips instead. The New Age Outlaw, obviously, ended up with a faceful. 2 years later, during Mr. McMahon's tyrannical Kiss My Ass Club, it was The Rock who changed the ass in question, bringing out Rikishi for his boss to anally inspect. The stip lay dormant for some time before a Kiss Me Arse match between Sheamus and Dolph Ziggler at Extreme Rules 2015. Despite winning the bout, it was the show-off who got a close-up view of the Celtic cornhole.